وَلَا تَتَّبِعِ الْهَوَى فَيُضِلُّكَ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. And follow not your desire, for it will mislead you from the path of Allah. Perfection of a person's Islam is that he leaves that which doesn't concern him. He leaves that which he's not meant to have inayah for. He's not meant to give importance towards. So for example, Shaykh Muhammad ibn Salih al-Uthaymeen, he said, a person sees people having a conversation and he thinks and he says to himself, I wonder what they're talking about. I'd like to know what they're talking about. From the perfection of your Islam is that you leave that. Or that may lead to a person doing that which is haram. It may lead to a person eavesdropping, going in and listening to their conversation. So from the perfection of a person's Islam, as far as his mu'amalat with other people is concerned, is that he leaves those matters that don't concern him. And as Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali, he mentioned, that this doesn't mean that you leave off those matters that your desires don't have any concern for, that your whims and your fancies don't have any concern for. No. He said, it isn't by the judgment of your whims and your desires, but rather it is by the judgment of the Sharia and Islam. Meaning, whatever Islam says that you're meant to have concern for, busy yourself with that. Whatever Islam says that you're not meant to have concern for, leave that off. So therefore, the first thing are the muharramat, those things that are prohibited. Leave off those muharramat. Then after that, those things that are makruh, disliked, they're not haram, but it is better for you to leave them off. Leave them off. That is from the perfection of your Islam. And then the highest level of them is those things that are fudul, those things that are excessive. Excessive looking, excessive listening, excessive speaking, excessive eating, excessive drinking, excessive sleeping, and so on and so forth. Those matters of the dunya that are excessive, leave them off. Once you leave them off, then you have then you have done one of those factors that contribute to the perfection of your Islam. Leaving off those matters that don't concern you, other people's businesses, other people's affairs, matters that are haram, matters that are makruh, and then the highest of them, matters that are not haram or makruh, they are permitted, but you leave them off because they're excessive matters. They're not haram and they're not makruh, permitted matters, but you leave them off out of wara', out of a form of piety. You leave them off, thus you have reached the pinnacle of your Islam, and thus you have implemented the statement of the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam, that from the perfection of a person's Islam is that he leaves that which doesn't concern him. So then the question arises, how do I get to that level? How do I get to that level of leaving off those things that don't concern me and that the Sharia has told me not to be concerned with and not to give importance to? How do I get to that level? That goes back to the initial point that we mentioned, that the highest level of Islam is to worship Allah as though you see Him, and even if you don't see Him, then surely He sees you. So the way that you get to that level, the way that you get to the level of leaving off those matters that don't concern you, is by this, is by observing the highest level of Islam, worshipping Allah as though you see Him, and even though you don't see Him, then surely He sees you. The scholars, they mention that this pillar of ihsan in fact contains two levels. Ihsan, which is the highest pillar, the highest level of your deen, it itself contains of two pillars. One is muraqabah, and the other, which is higher than it, is mushahada. One is muraqabah, that you are conscious of the fact that Allah is seeing you, He's hearing you, He's watching you, He's well acquainted with what you do. And the level that is higher than that is mushahada, literally witnessing, meaning it is as though that you are standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is as though that you are right in front of Him, standing in front of Him. This is the highest level. But either of these two levels whether it is the lesser of the two levels of ihsan, muraqabah, that you're conscious that your Lord is watching you and seeing you, or it's the highest of the two levels of ihsan, mushahada, that you worship Allah as though you are in front of Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. Either of these two levels, when you are observant of them, then that will lead you to leaving off those matters that you're not meant to give importance to. It will lead you to leaving off those matters that don't concern you. How? Why? Because when a person becomes conscious of how close Allah is to him, when a person becomes conscious of how close Allah is to him, and he worships Allah as though he is in front of him, seeing him, when he becomes conscious of this qurb of Allah, this closeness of Allah to him, then you become too shy to do haram in front of Allah. You become too ashamed to do even makruh in front of Allah. You become too shy, too ashamed to do even those things that are permitted by going in excess in those permitted matters. So that is how you do it. That is how you leave off those matters that you're not meant to give any importance to, that you're not meant to be concerned with. By number one, being conscious of the fact that Allah is seeing you, watching you, well acquainted with what you do, and that should lead you to the highest level, which is worshipping Allah Jalla wa Az as though you are standing in front of Him Jalla wa Az.